There has never been a sim more simultaneously hated and revered than Agnes Crumplebottom. Yet despite her origins as an unlovable curmudgeon and the infamy she's cultivated over the years, the Sims franchise has quietly scattered clues suggesting that Agnes' story is far more complex and far more tragic than it first appears. Is her disdain of public displays of affection the bitterness of a scorned lover, or the hollow grief of a mother who lost her child? As always, we'll follow her journey and that of her family in the order the games were released. Agnes is one of the rare townies to appear in every installment of The Sims since its inception, so it's no surprise that her story is messy, convoluted, and at times deeply contradictory. But by unpacking how and why her narrative has evolved, we can begin to truly understand who Agnes Crumplebottom is, and what shaped her into the figure we recognize today. After each mainline game era, I'll pause to summarize Agnes' story up to that point, gradually building towards a definitive timeline. If you enjoy the video and want to see more deep dives like this, please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment below telling me your favorite moment. And don't forget, after you subscribe, click the bell icon so you never miss an upload. Alright, let's get started. The third expansion pack for The Sims, Hot Date, was released on November 14th, 2001. Often hailed as one of the greatest expansions in the franchise, Hot Date introduced a number of groundbreaking features, most notably the ability for Sims to visit community lots beyond their own homes. It also added the downtown Sim City neighborhood along with a wealth of new social interactions and relationship mechanics. And of course, most relevant to today's video, it marked the debut of Miss Crumplebottom. At any downtown community lot, your Sims might encounter a sharply dressed, no-nonsense elder who will quite literally assault them with her purse if they so much as flirt in her line of sight. I don't typically like to jump ahead, but for clarity's sake, I'm not just being respectful by calling her Miss Crumplebottom. That's how she's officially referred to throughout the entire game. In fact, her first name isn't revealed until The Sims 2, but make no mistake, this is Agnes. When she appears on a community lot, Miss Crumplebottom often sits alone at the chess table. Yet in true Crumplebottom fashion, the moment another Sim tries to join her, she promptly stands up and walks away. She's not a complete wet blanket, however. You can occasionally catch her dancing, ordering ice cream, or playing the piano. Because while holding hands or hugging may be, in her view, immodest and unbecoming of a lady, throwing it back on the dance floor apparently isn't. With her contradictory quirks, prissy attitude, and unwavering moral code, Miss Crumplebottom quickly earned a reputation as either a cherished icon or a notorious nuisance among Sims players. Curiously, downtown Sim City also features a location called Crumplebottom Memorial Park. The lot description states it was dedicated in loving memory of Robert Crumplebottom, one of Sims Nation's most beloved puppeteers and philanthropists. Interestingly, the game itself makes no direct connection between Robert and Miss Crumplebottom, and the only way to uncover their relationship was through purchasing this. Released alongside the expansion, strategy guides from companies like Prima gave players helpful tips, tricks, and importantly, extra lore that wasn't available in the game itself. Back in 2001, the internet wasn't quite what it is today. Information wasn't instantly accessible, and you might be surprised just how massive the market for books like this was. According to the guide, Miss Crumplebottom is revealed to be the widow of Robert Crumplebottom. However, what became of him was left ambiguous at the time. That a woman as notoriously unpleasant as Miss Crumplebottom was once married to a kind-hearted puppeteer and philanthropist is frankly baffling and raises more questions than it answers. But the mystery starts to unravel with the release of The Sims Vacation, the follow-up expansion to Hot Date. Among its many additions is the Crumplebottom Chandelier, a decorative item described as a replica of the very stage prop that tragically fell 2 stories onto Robert during his annual winter charity performance, bringing his life to a sudden and untimely end. Curiously, the item's description implies that Robert died young, suggesting that Miss Crumplebottom has lived much of her life as a widow. The Sims Unleashed, the franchise's 5th expansion pack, introduced a larger neighborhood, new townies, community lots, and even pets. While no new lore was added for Miss Crumplebottom herself, one of the quarters in Old Town is notably named Crumplebottom Court, a subtle detail that suggests the Crumplebottoms were among Old Town's original founding families alongside the Goths. At first glance, it's easy to dismiss Miss Crumplebottom as simply an old prude, a label the game itself uses. But the Sims team leaves subtle hints that her strict behavior is rooted not just in propriety, but in heartbreak and a lingering resentment towards the world's injustices. This deeper understanding becomes more apparent later in the series, but for now, let's summarize the facts as they're presented in The Sims 1. Agnes, maiden name unknown, and Robert Crumplebottom are born in Sim City. Agnes meets Robert and the two marry. Robert rises to fame as a celebrated puppeteer, amassing considerable wealth along the way. Together with Gunther Goth, Robert helps establish Old Town and dedicates much of his fortune to philanthropic causes. Robert's life is tragically cut short in a freak accident during his annual winter charity performance, leaving Agnes a widow. In the years that follow, Agnes withdraws from public life. Her grief hardens into bitterness, and she develops a deep loathing for affection and romance, eventually answering only to Miss Crumplebottom. With the release of The Sims 2, the family histories of many famous Sims were expanded through the game's innovative memory and family tree system. The Sims 2 takes place 25 years after the events of The Sims 1, and by this time, Miss Crumplebottom has long since passed away. However, the Goth family tree reveals that Gunther Goth's wife, Cornelia, who we first met in The Sims Unleashed, was actually born a Crumplebottom, making her Agnes' sister and the daughter of Simon and Prudence Crumplebottom. This family connection lends weight to the theory that the Crumplebottoms were a founding family of Old Town, as it was common for prominent families to unite through marriage. If you watched my video on the Goth family history, you'll recall that Mortimer Goth was born in the Old Country, a detail that suggests Cornelia and by extension the Crumplebottoms also originated from there. Curiously, there's no mention or reference to Robert Crumplebottom in the game whatsoever. Furthermore, the family tree indicates that Agnes was a Crumplebottom by birth, suggesting that Robert may have taken her surname. And while undeniably progressive for the time, this would also be fitting for a family of such prominence and prestige. This detail raised questions and doubts about whether Agnes and Miss Crumplebottom were truly one and the same. Fortunately, a developer interview regarding The Sims 2 Nightlife, which we'll explore shortly, confirmed that they are in fact the same person. The absence of Robert from the family tree remains unexplained, though it was likely due to his lack of direct ties to the Goth lineage, which was the central focus of that particular tree. In The Sims 2 University, there's a street named Crumplebottom Drive, suggesting that the family's legacy of philanthropy lives on. The Sims 2 Nightlife, the second expansion pack for The Sims 2 and a spiritual successor to The Sims Hot Date, also introduced a downtown neighborhood along with a complete overhaul of the relationship system. While there's no direct connection between The Sims 2's downtown and the one from The Sims 1, in my headcanon, I like to think that they're one and the same, perhaps just different parts of the same city. Remember, up until The Sims 3, every game in the series was set in different parts of Sim City, itself a part of a larger country known as Sim Nation. I covered this in detail in my video on the Goth family, but since it's relevant here, let's take a quick moment to ground ourselves geographically at the start of The Sims 2. Gunther Goth and Simon Crumplebottom traveled from the Old Country to establish a town in Sim City. Years later, the town fell into disrepair until Sim City passed Resolution 309B-Z-2A, incorporating part of the city into what became the revitalized historic district of Old Town. 25 years after that, Old Town was rezoned and renamed Pleasant View, a change we can trace through consistent street names, SimCity references, and other environmental clues. So it stands to reason that these two downtowns are in essence one and the same. Naturally, no downtown would be complete without an ornery old lady, and that's exactly where we encounter Mrs. Crumplebottom. Remember that developer interview from earlier? Apparently her reappearance sparked quite a bit of confusion, as it wasn't immediately clear whether Miss Crumplebottom and Mrs. Crumplebottom were meant to be the same person. However, as I've mentioned, the developers clarified this misconception. They simply wanted to recreate the iconic purse-wielding prude from The Sims Hot Date, even going so far as to alter the capitalization of her name to avoid confusion, with clearly minimal success. Much like in Hot Date, Mrs. Crumplebottom is portrayed as an old-fashioned strict woman who despises public displays of affection, often going so far as to physically assault Sims who engage in them. In keeping with Agnes's famously contradictory nature, Mrs. Crumplebottom enjoys bowling, poker, and even a drink now and then, proving that in her eyes, not all vices are created equal. As one might expect from her distinguished lineage, Mrs. Crumplebottom is also quite wealthy. Various career events reveal that she serves as the head of the Old Town Senior Citizens Tour Group and is the primary investor in Land Grab Industries. She even owns the SimCity Llamas, the local sports ball team. Unfortunately, we're given no concrete indication of how she's related to Agnes Crumplebottom. The developers have hinted that she's a very distant relative, and given that the Crumplebottoms are known to hail from the Old Country, it stands to reason that she's likely a cousin or part of some other extended branch of the family. Curiously, Mrs. Crumplebottom is often seen with the pacifier thought bubble, suggesting that she may want children, a detail that takes on greater meaning a little later in the story. Now that we've uncovered a bit more about the origins of the Crumplebottom family, let's update our timeline to reflect the events of The Sims 2. Simon and Prudence Crumplebottom are born in the Old Country. As adults, they marry and have two daughters, Cornelia and Agnes Crumplebottom. In her young adulthood, Cornelia marries Gunther Goth. The Crumplebottoms relocate to SimCity and help establish Old Town alongside the Goth family. Agnes meets Robert and the two marry, with Robert taking the Crumplebottom name. Robert rises to fame as a celebrated puppeteer, amassing considerable wealth along the way. Simon and Prudence Crumplebottom pass away. Robert devotes much of his fortune to philanthropic causes. Robert's life is tragically cut short in a freak accident during his annual winter charity performance, leaving Agnes a widow. In the years that follow, Agnes withdraws from public life. Her grief hardens into bitterness, and she develops a deep loathing for affection and romance, eventually answering only to Miss Crumplebottom. Cornelia Goth passes away. Agnes Crumplebottom passes away. Around this time, Mrs. Crumplebottom, implied to be a distant relative, moves to downtown SimCity from the old country, invests heavily in local institutions, and gains infamy as the city's new moral enforcer, the latest incarnation of Old Lady Crumplebottom. The Sims 3 marked a shift in the series' approach to storytelling, launching with Sunset Valley, a world set 25 years prior to the events of The Sims 1. Alongside the ancestors of iconic townies like the Goths, Bachelors, and Landgrabs, we also meet a young Agnes Crumplebottom in the prime of her life. Agnes lives alone in August Moon, a sleek modern mansion in Sunset Valley. Though still a loner and a bit of a grump, she's also described as a hopeless romantic who dreams of becoming a successful author. Agnes is especially close to her sister Cornelia Goth and is the only individual she really ever spends time with in-game. Her biography reveals that her husband died during their honeymoon, confirming what we had long suspected since The Sims 1, that this devastating loss was the catalyst for the woman she would eventually become. But there's a bit of a problem. The tombstone on Agnes's lot belongs to Erik Darling, not Robert Crumplebottom. According to the inscription, Erik drowned, suggesting that The Sims 3 Sunset Valley takes place before Agnes ever meets Robert. And this timeline adds up. Agnes is still a young adult, and it's likely she met Robert sometime after Erik's death. Which means she didn't just lose one husband, she lost two. That alone would be enough trauma to harden anyone into the woman we eventually come to know, but it doesn't end there. Inside her sprawling estate, tucked away on the second floor, is a half-finished room with a single crib, a space clearly left in the midst of preparation for a new child. I want to take a moment and give a trigger warning as we're about to talk about some heavy topics, so if you don't want to hear about child loss, you can skip to the timestamp below. Okay, so the Sims Wiki and other theorists have posited that Agnes and Erik had likely started renovating the room to begin trying for a baby, but ultimately didn't get the chance due to his sudden death. But Erik died on his honeymoon. Agnes's entire persona is built around a strict, almost Victorian moral code, so the idea that she would have been living with Erik before marriage doesn't quite fit her character. And realistically, how many people do you know who start preparing a nursery before they're even expecting? Again, I don't want to speak for everyone, but based on the available evidence, the most likely explanation is this. If Erik died during their honeymoon, before Agnes could even change her last name, and this house is clearly the Crumplebottom estate, then the nursery must have begun renovation after his death, which strongly suggests that Agnes was pregnant when she lost Erik. And the fact that there's no baby Crumplebottom and that the nursery remains unfinished strongly implies that Agnes didn't just lose her beloved husband, she lost her child as well. It's unlikely the Sims team would ever overtly place such a painful and tragic storyline directly in front of players, but the subtle clues scattered throughout the game strongly suggest that this was, at the very least, the intended subtext of Agnes' story. And as if that weren't enough to leave anyone bitter, she eventually gives love another chance with Robert, only to lose him too. It was this second heartbreak that cemented her deep resentment towards love, romance, and public displays of affection, a bitterness that would follow her for the rest of her life. With the release of Barnacle Bay, a downloadable coastal world nestled in the Sumerian Sea, we're introduced to a character named Agnes Seabottom. If you've been following this series, you'll remember we first mentioned Barnacle Bay during the Caliente Sisters episode, and noted that, unlike Sunset Valley, this world is set shortly after the events of The Sims 2. It's important to keep in mind that not every world in The Sims 3 exists along the same timeline, so I'll be sure to clarify where each one fits whenever it's relevant. Agnes Seabottom is a young adult living in Barnacle Bay. She works in the military by day and moonlights as an evil genius and aspiring master thief. Her biography describes her as massively wealthy, but curiously questions whether her fortune is somehow connected to the Crumplebottom family. This of course raises some interesting possibilities. Most notably that this Agnes may have stolen from the Crumplebottom estate and even adopted the name Seabottom as a not so subtle nod or mockery of the original. Agnes Seabottom is notably secretive and keeps to herself, behavior that aligns with the theory that she's on the run after a recent theft, having fled from Pleasantview to avoid being caught. What this ultimately means for Mrs. Crumplebottom and her vast fortune is unclear, but given how wealthy and old this family is, it's safe to assume she's hardly noticed anything's missing. With the release of The Sims 3 Supernatural in 2012, players were introduced to the eerie world of Moonlight Falls, a town home to zombies, werewolves, fairies, and more. Among its residents are the Crumplebottom sisters Beatrice, Belinda, and Bianca. The Crumplebottom sisters are witches, and I mean full-blown cauldron-stirring spellcasting witches. Beatrice is the eldest of the three, and her sole ambition is to become the most powerful witch Moonlight Falls has ever known. She has no interest in making friends, tends to be aloof and arrogant, and doesn't exactly play well with others. Belinda, the middle sister, often finds herself in the role of peacekeeper, single-handedly responsible for keeping Beatrice and Bianca from tearing each other apart. Belinda is a kind and loving individual, which is unique as far as Crumplebottoms go, and besides being a witch, also works as an ingredients taster. Bianca is the youngest of the three sisters and proudly the family rebel. She considers herself extraordinarily beautiful and often wonders if that's the real reason behind her strained relationship with her sisters. Flirty, childish, and undeniably snobbish, Bianca currently works as a stagehand, but dreams of striking it rich and living the glamorous life she believes she deserves. As far as we know, the Crumplebottom sisters of Moonlight Falls have no direct connection to Agnes Crumplebottom. They're most likely distant relatives, or perhaps even ancestors of Mrs. Crumplebottom from The Sims 2 Nightlife. From what I've gathered, Beatrice, Belinda, and Bianca appear to be a playful homage to Prue, Piper, and Phoebe, the three witches from the 1990s TV series Charmed, who famously discovered their magical heritage and formed the Power of Three. Why the Sims team chose to give them the Crumplebottom name remains unclear. It may have simply been a playful nod to the family's legacy, but beyond the shared surname, their presence doesn't contribute meaningfully to the broader Crumplebottom narrative. Before we dive into the Sims 3 timeline, let's pause and spotlight a few Crumplebottom related Easter eggs that explore hidden details that actually reveal quite a bit about the family's shadowy past. In The Sims Medieval, a bard can perform a song called the Crumplebottom Waltz, a charming detail that strongly suggests the Crumplebottoms are quite literally one of the oldest families in Sims history. In MySims, the former Nintendo exclusive title now available on PC, use code GONS if you pick it up, by the way, thank you, you'll meet Amira Clamp, a stern librarian who despises noise and fun in equal measure. Her biography notes that Auntie Crumplebottom taught her the best mouth is a shut mouth. It's unclear which Crumplebottom she's referring to, but considering the game features a costume nearly identical to Mrs. Crumplebottom, it's fair to assume she's the one being referenced. Admittedly, this does create a few continuity issues, but thankfully it's nothing to lose sleep over. Elmira also has a nephew named Ian Arneson, which by extension makes him the great-nephew of Mrs. Crumplebottom. He's portrayed as geeky, socially awkward, and like his aunt, harbors a strong distaste for fun. Now that we've explored Agnes's extended legacy and her possible connections across the Sims 3 era, let's update our timeline to reflect the major events of The Sims 3. The Crumplebottom family lineage dates all the way back to medieval times, establishing them as one of the oldest families in Sims history. Centuries later, Simon and Prudence Crumplebottom are born in the Old Country. As adults, they marry and have two daughters, Cornelia and Agnes Crumplebottom. In her young adulthood, Cornelia marries Gunther Goth. The Crumplebottoms relocate to Sim City and help establish Sunset Valley alongside the Goths and Landgrabs. Agnes marries Erik Darling, but during their honeymoon, Erik tragically drowns, leaving Agnes widowed and pregnant. Shortly after, Agnes loses the child. Around the same time, witches Beatrice, Belinda, and Bianca Crumplebottom move from the Old Country to Moonlight Falls. Agnes meets Robert and the two marry, with Robert taking the Crumplebottom name. Robert rises to fame as a celebrated puppeteer, amassing considerable wealth along the way. Simon and Prudence Crumplebottom pass away. Robert devotes much of his fortune to philanthropic causes. Robert's life is tragically cut short in a freak accident during his annual winter charity performance, leaving Agnes a widow. In the years that follow, Agnes withdraws from public life. Her grief hardens into bitterness, and she develops a deep loathing for affection and romance, eventually answering only to Miss Crumplebottom. Cornelia Goth passes away. Agnes Crumplebottom passes away. Around this time, Mrs. Crumplebottom, implied to be a distant relative, moves to downtown SimCity from the Old Country, invests heavily in local institutions, and gains infamy as the city's new moral enforcer, the latest incarnation of Old Lady Crumplebottom. Mrs. Crumplebottom, matriarch of the Crumplebottom family, eventually has children, one of whom gives birth to Amira Crumplebottom and an unnamed sister. Amira Crumplebottom later marries, becoming Amira Clamp, and begins working as librarian. The unnamed sister marries into the Arneson family and gives birth to Ian Arneson. For unknown reasons, Amira becomes Ian's legal guardian, raising him in place of his birth mother. Meanwhile, a mysterious woman named Agnes Seabottom emerges, stealing a portion of Mrs. Crumplebottom's fortune and vanishes to Barnacle Bay, where she assumes a new identity and lives in secrecy. Surprisingly, The Sims 4 launched without any mention of the Crumplebottoms, and for years that didn't change. It wasn't until 7 years later, with the release of the game's 11th expansion pack, Cottage Living, that we finally saw the return of the mean, purse-wielding menace herself. Agnes now lives in the quiet countryside town of Finchwick in Henford-on-Bagley, alongside her cousin, Agatha Crumplebottom. Agnes is a hot-headed loner who's seemingly always angry, and true to form, she'll whip out her purse to attack anyone daring enough to show PDA in her presence. Her cousin Agatha is a new addition to the Crumplebottom lineage, and hilariously, she's everything Agnes isn't: flirty, outgoing, and perpetually cheerful. Together, the two Crumplebottoms run a modest garden stall in the village square, but beyond that, they largely keep to themselves. If you build a strong friendship with Agnes and have a heart-to-heart with her, she'll open up about much of the past we've already uncovered. Her relationships with Robert and Erik, her connection to the Goths, and the fact that she's not originally from Finchwick. This deeper insight, alongside her timeline references, strongly suggests that Henford-on-Bagley is set after the events of The Sims 1 and 3, but before The Sims 2. As a reminder, when The Sims 4 first launched in 2014, it stirred major controversy. The return of familiar townies, now with conflicting ages, personalities, and relationships, made it difficult to place the game within the franchise's established timeline. Eventually, Sarah Holding, a former producer on The Sims 4, stated on Twitter that the game takes place in an alternate timeline. And as I've said time and time again, this so-called alternate reality was likely a diplomatic way for the developers to let fans know that The Sims 4 would not be bound by the continuity of earlier games, at least not when it conflicted with their creative vision. Because of that, just like with The Sims 3, I believe each world in The Sims 4 exists at a different point in the timeline. And for now, Henford-on-Bagley fits right here. A few viewers have pointed out that townies can travel between worlds, so how can each one have a different timeline? To that I say, those are gameplay mechanics, implemented to improve user experience, not reflections of the narrative canon. You can make Bella Goth marry the Grim Reaper, but that doesn't mean it's official lore. In the 13th expansion pack, Growing Together, fan favorite Kyle Carlson receives the Crumplebottom's milestone, a special achievement granted to Sims who've been on the receiving end of Agnes's infamous purse attack. This makes Kyle one of the few canon Sims to experience it firsthand, which honestly is just so Kyle. Then, in July 2023, The Sims 4 released its 14th expansion pack, Horse Ranch, introducing the Arizona-inspired prairie world of Chestnut Ridge. Discerning players may have noticed a mysterious rancher named Roberto Crinkletop wandering the map. Fans quickly began to speculate as Roberto bore an uncanny resemblance to Robert Crumplebottom, and in August of that year, the Sims team released a short video officially confirming that Roberto was, in fact, Agnes's former husband. The video shows a younger Agnes scolding Robert before he glances up at a chandelier, the very object that in established lore caused his death during a winter charity performance. A crashing sound follows, and we see Robert mount a horse and flee, strongly implying he faked his death. But if you've been following along, you'll probably notice some inconsistencies. According to the lore, Robert died on stage during a winter charity performance, not at home. And he and Agnes lived in Old Town, not Henford-on-Bagley. Plus, Robert was a beloved puppeteer and philanthropist. Faking his death just to escape an unhappy marriage just doesn't align with the kind of man he was. Realistically, this video was likely just a fun Easter egg. The Sims team used what assets they have on hand, namely Henford-on-Bagley and its characters, to craft a cheeky nod for fans. They weren't going to build an entire Old Town map for a 30-second cutscene, so they adapted what was available. It's understandable, especially for newer players who don't know the lore inside out. But for longtime fans, this brings us back to the real utility of the alternate timeline excuse. It allows developers to bend, tweak, or even ignore canon when it suits the narrative and simply say it's a different universe. That said, inaccurate as it may be, the core message still holds. Robert Crumplebottom is alive. He faked his death and fled to Chestnut Ridge. Which means Chestnut Ridge likely exists during the same era as Henford-on-Bagley, placing both just before the events of The Sims 2. In the 17th expansion pack, Life and Death, it's revealed that Ravenwood is the ancestral home of the Goth family, confirming it as the old country first mentioned all the way back in The Sims 1. Naturally, this also implies that the Crumplebottoms originated from Ravenwood too, as the two families appear deeply intertwined throughout Sims history, likely working together to establish what would become Old Town or Sunset Valley depending on the game. Why the Sims team didn't include a new Crumplebottom in Ravenwood is honestly beyond me. We already know that the Crumplebottom sisters from The Sims 3 Supernatural are full-blown witches. And in The Sims 4 Life and Death, we finally meet Raven Dancer Goth, a powerful ancestral spellcaster who lived in Ravenwood. If they had dropped just one Crumplebottom into Ravenwood, it would have tied everything together perfectly. The Goths and Crumplebottoms both originating in Ravenwood, a shared magical lineage running through both families, a direct connection between Raven Dancer and the Crumplebottom witches, and a full circle explanation for why Agnes seems so doomed when it comes to love. But instead, nothing. Just another missed opportunity that makes Sims lore nerds like us scream into the void. But then again, who would be obsessive enough to deep dive into 25 years of Sims lore just to catch a split-second reference to a purse-wielding maniac? Okay, maybe I'm bitter about it. Now that we've explored the Crumplebottoms throughout the Sims 4 era, let's update the timeline accordingly and establish the definitive Crumplebottom history. The Crumplebottom family lineage dates all the way back to medieval times, establishing them as one of the oldest families in Sims history. Centuries later, Simon and Prudence Crumplebottom are born in Ravenwood. As adults, they marry and have two daughters, Cornelia and Agnes Crumplebottom. In her young adulthood, Cornelia marries Gunther Goth. The Crumplebottoms relocate to Sim City and help establish Sunset Valley alongside the Goths and Landgrabs. Agnes marries Erik Darling, but during their honeymoon, Erik tragically drowns, leaving Agnes widowed and pregnant. Shortly after, Agnes loses the child. Around the same time, witches Beatrice, Belinda, and Bianca Crumplebottom move from Ravenwood to Moonlight Falls. Agnes meets Robert and the two marry, with Robert taking the Crumplebottom name. Robert rises to fame as a celebrated puppeteer, amassing considerable wealth along the way. Simon and Prudence Crumplebottom pass away. Robert devotes much of his fortune to philanthropic causes. Unhappy in his marriage, Robert fakes his death during his annual winter charity performance, only to resurface years later in Chestnut Ridge under a new name, Roberto Crinkletop. In the years that follow, Agnes withdraws from public life. Her grief hardens into bitterness, and she develops a deep loathing for affection and romance, eventually answering only to Miss Crumplebottom. Cornelia Goth passes away. Agnes relocates to Henford-on-Bagley with her cousin Agatha, starting a quiet new life as village gardeners. Agnes discovers that Robert is still alive and sets off for Chestnut Ridge to confront him, only for him to slip through her fingers once again. Agnes Crumplebottom passes away. Robert and Agatha Crumplebottom also pass away. Around this time, Mrs. Crumplebottom, implied to be a distant relative, moves to downtown SimCity from Ravenwood, invests heavily in local institutions, and gains infamy as the city's new moral enforcer, the latest incarnation of Old Lady Crumplebottom. Mrs. Crumplebottom, matriarch of the Crumplebottom family, eventually has children, one of whom gives birth to Amira Crumplebottom and an unnamed sister. Amira Crumplebottom later marries, becoming Amira Clamp, and begins working as librarian. The unnamed sister marries into the Arneson family and gives birth to Ian Arneson. For unknown reasons, Amira becomes Ian's legal guardian, raising him in place of his birth mother. Meanwhile, a mysterious woman named Agnes Seabottom emerges, stealing a portion of Mrs. Crumplebottom's fortune and vanishes to Barnacle Bay, where she assumes a new identity and lives in secrecy. And with that, the tragic tale of Agnes Crumplebottom comes to a close. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you for taking this journey with me. As always, I hope this deep dive helped you see that Agnes' story is far more layered and heartbreaking than just the old prude with the purse. If you've got your own theories, or if you disagree with mine, let's hear it. Drop them in the comments below. And while you're there, let me know which sim or sim family you'd like me to cover next. Creating these videos, keeping up with weekly shorts, and balancing a full-time job is a lot. So if you'd like to support the channel and help me keep going, please consider joining my Patreon. The link's in the description, and to my current patrons, thank you so much. Your support truly means the world to me. And hey, if you want to hang out live, watch me play The Sims and other cozy games, come say hi on Twitch at twitch.tv/mynameisgons. I stream every Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern, and I'd love to see you there. Alright, stay curious, stay cozy, and I'll see you in the next one.